Good morning for most of you. On behalf of Bureau Veritas, I would like to warmly welcome you to the first episode of a series of webinars about the NIS2 Directive, raising cyber resilience across Europe. My name is Sjoerd Perelkamp. I'm heading the Industrial Market Group at Secura, a Bureau Veritas company. With my team, we provide insight into cybersecurity risks to many industrial companies, and we do this for people, process, and technology access. So on one hand, we go deep with technical penetration testing and so on. On the other hand, we have a lot of process work where we help people and companies getting into control of their cybersecurity risks. And in this first episode, we would like to introduce you actually to the NIS2 Directive. And who can do this better than one of the founding fathers of the European Parliament, Bart Groothuis. Could you please introduce yourself?
Yes, good morning, Sjoerd, and to all watching. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's an honor. I'm unfortunately in the unfortunate position that I was tested positive for COVID. That's why I can't be there in Amsterdam today. But tomorrow I'm back on the streets, so watch out. Listen, the first thing I'd like to say is I do have one short speech to make in Brussels because I'm a negotiator on the CHIPS Act. It's 43 billion we're spending, and it's the first appreciation of the political groups, and I negotiate on behalf of the centrist Renew group. So I have to get out for 2 or 3 minutes at max, but I will be back. So stay tuned, as Stash will fill that void when I'm gone. Sjoerd, would you like me to kick off the webinar and start all on the
No, I first would like Stash to introduce himself as well, one of my colleagues.
Hello, I'm Stash Kupinski. I'm an OT cybersecurity consultant at Secura. Sjoerd is my manager, and I'm also the NIS2 knowledge expert within Secura. So that's why I'm taking over for Bart when he has to leave for a couple of minutes.
Right. So once again, thank you for joining. We have a few topics on the agenda for today. I would like to ask Bart in a few minutes to start with the NIS2 Directive, actually, so introducing it. What is it about? We'll discuss why we do this update, what has changed in the directive, how and when it comes into effect, what the impact will be on your organization, and how you might be able to comply. At the meantime, there is a chat box in the screen. Please ask your questions already in between. As a moderator, I will try to catch up with those questions and maybe already mix them into the conversation. Otherwise, we'll also have some time at the end of the meeting to have some further Q&A. So that having said, I would like to ask Bart, could you maybe start with an introduction of the NIS2 Directive for all the audience?
Sure, and thank you again for having me. It's been on my mind for the past 2 years, 24/7, the NIS2, as I'm Parliament's rapporteur on this one. And I'll explain more on what that entails. But it's been on my mind for the past 9 years as I was head of the cybersecurity department at the Dutch Ministry of Defense. So I stem from this field. This is why I went to Brussels, and I'm very honored that Parliament has anointed me as their rapporteur on this file. And listen, the reason is because you're all security experts. We will not discuss the threat landscape and how that evolved and why the NIS2 is necessary. You all understand. But what I'd like to want to discuss is that we want to make cybersecurity Chefsache, like they say in good German. The CEOs matter. The boardroom issue. Those are the things that we like to say to our customers, right? And we do that, and we say that, but nothing happens. It's not a boardroom issue, not at all. It's still the IT guy back somewhere in the back, and they still said manage cybersecurity. We have different processes. This is it. It didn't really work in the past 10 or 12 years. I think what also didn't work is your good advice to any customer you went to, say you should spend more money on cybersecurity, because they didn't. We spent 41% less on cybersecurity in Europe than they do in the US, right? 41%. Take that. The third thing I think is good to notice is that we want Europe, everyone wants to have information sharing arrangements with your customers, among companies, but especially with the government in that ecosystem. And then Europe came and introduced the GDPR. And you're all scared. You're all scared because an IP address, an email address, it might be a personal data. You might be liable for something, so you don't share. So that ecosystem has halted. It's been hampered significantly. And then if we look at, in the Dutch police said in 2019, cybercrime doubled and tripled, the tripling of ransomware in 2020, said the FBI. A doubling in the year afterwards. So what we see ransomware as a service, we see ransomware as an instrument of foreign policy. We see so many developments in the world around us, and nothing happened in the field of legislation. And then if you're a company, you have services in Romania and the Netherlands and Italy, and you have a fabric somewhere in Spain, you have different rules. You don't know what to do. So when you're hit, who do you call? Like it's the Kissinger dilemma. If you want to call Europe, who do you call? But it's also like you have a problem in Europe, who do you call? You don't know. So the internal market was divided. That's why the NIS2 came as a successor of the NIS1. We'll discuss that later. But we created, to be very short, 160,000, might be less, might be a little bit more. We're still debating it. It's up to the member states, but about 160,000 vital entities. Is it just vital? No, there are two sorts of entities, important and essential. Those are the two entities that you will we will be looking at in the next couple of years to be created and be nurtured, because they have to they need your support. They need cybersecurity support. They need to enhance their resilience significantly. Therefore, we will come with European certificates, certification schemes. Lots and lots of stuff will happen. What will also happen is that we will make it Chefsache, like I started. It will be the CEO, the board matter. Why? Because we will keep the CEO liable. Personally, yes, personally. And personally for 1.4% until 2%, we can talk about that later, as a fine. And this is what we negotiated in the past years, and we will improve the ecosystem to share, and we can discuss that further. But what we did is try to make sure that the GDPR that hampered Article 6, that hampered the information sharing arrangement, that we actually tried to re-emphasize the responsibility to share, and not just say we want you to share and you feel liable. No, it's a responsibility to share if you have information that can help others. Listen. Last thing, what is a rapporteur? Who are you looking at? Who is Bart, right? It's like you read in the newspapers, Brussels want X, Y, or Z, right? And oftentimes it's the European Commission that wants something. And the European Commission wrote this proposal, yes, they did. But they are totally irrelevant when it comes to this legislation. There's two institutions that make law in Europe. It's the Council, the 27 member states, and Parliament. Parliament says we need one rapporteur who needs to get 353 seats, a majority, for the points that he is trying to negotiate. That's my job, getting 705 seats behind what I want. And I think I succeeded. We will be voting on this next month or in a couple of weeks. That's my job. Then the job of the presidency of the council, the 27 member states, in my case it was the French, it is their job to not have vetoes, don't have blocking minorities, and have a majority on the council side. So together we bake this legislation. The Commission is not a player. They are only advisors. They are very important, knowledgeable people. They wrote this proposal initially, but we significantly amended it. And how did we amend it? And then I'll give it back to you, Stuart. We amended it on my personal note to, I want Europe to go into a new phase of cybersecurity, from passive information sharing ex post, when an incident has already occurred, see how we can help others, etc., making sharing arrangement happen. But the practice is, I come from this field, is sending PDFs to each other, right? It doesn't work. So what I wanted is going from that phase to a new phase, to phase 2.0, to active sharing arrangements, to actively thwart, actively stop, actively block things from occurring. And that's a new posture. And as we see with the cybersecurity strategy in the Netherlands that was presented this week, we're not there yet. And we need to get the governments going. We need new structures in place that actually thwart DNS requests from your customers when we know it's malware. We need ISPs on board, Ziggo, we need KPN, we need others in Europe to say, this is known malware. If you click, you will get a red screen. It's a free country. If you want malware, click on it, but don't, because it's malware. Getting into the lives of ordinary citizens, protecting them with the knowledge that we have in a new eco-sharing, new ecosystems, sharing arrangements. That's what we want. That's what we're going towards, from a passive to an active cyber defense posture. And I'm hoping to get you on board, because the industry is equally important in this one as governments are. and legislative files. So I'd like to have your opinion, your questions on it, and let's have a good webinar here and a good debate. Back to you, Sjoerd.
Yes, I just got a message that you probably have to switch to your other meeting pretty soon. So let me know if you need to step out. One of the first questions I have in mind is that we already are implementing the NIS1 directive actually in all the member states. Why already a NIS2?
Well, the NIS1 was. I see I have to go. I'm so sorry. I'll be back in a couple of minutes, but I see I have to go.
Okay, I'll meet you.
Cheers.
Yes, I will be able to answer that question, of course.
So why Bart is away? Thank you for stepping in, and we'll catch up with Bart later on.
Yeah, no problem. So the reason why NIS2 is needed is because NIS1 has proven to be very outdated now with the COVID pandemic. And the whole working from home and the digitalization of the world and Europe, of course, the more interconnectivity of assets within the more internet interconnectivity, because this work from home is needed. It became apparent that the cybersecurity posture of Europe was not good enough, and NIS was not sufficient. Too little organizations and industry sectors fell within NIS1, which are now included in NIS2. Too little specific things, such as the addressing of supply chain, which is one of the biggest threat vectors at the moment. So supply chain attacks, they were not covered by NIS1, and they will be covered by NIS2, for example.
Yeah, so what are actually the key point differences between NIS and the NIS2 version? Supply chain is one of them. The amount of companies that are under that directive is one of them. Can you explain a bit of it?
Yeah, so supply chain security. So there has to be some sort of vetting of your supply chain. There has to be, second of all, what you just said already is more companies, but those more companies, they are not chosen at random, of course. They are included because they fall within a specific sector. So what you see now, for example, is that the food and beverage sector is also included. Operators of public services, such as, for example, DNS services, public communication networks, they all also now fall under this NIS2 directive. Moreover, what one of the main points is that they want to keep management also accountable. And this is a big change, which Bart will tell you more in a couple of minutes about. But yeah, this is a little sneak preview of what is going to happen when NIS2 comes into effect. And yeah, what you really see is that there will be more proactive protection measurements will be mandatory after NIS2 comes in effect, which was something that was not in effect with NIS1.
Yes. So it's about a broader range of companies that are in scope. It's the measures that are expected. They are more strict, actually. It's supply chain that comes into effect. Anything else to add to that list?
Yeah, I would say protection is a big keyword that's in NIS2 that was not really in NIS1. So preventive measurements has to be taken. It's not like, okay, you have been attacked. Let's see if your cybersecurity posture was on point. No, we want to see beforehand if the cybersecurity posture is upfront. And this is also a key difference between the important and the essential entities, which Bart already mentioned in short. But yeah, this is something we will discuss in more detail in a moment as well.
Yes. So thanks a lot about that part. Let me quickly check. When do you actually expect this NIS2 legislation to come into national levels into effect?
So as Bart already mentioned, the final vote will be in a couple of weeks to pass the directive to become a European-wide legislation. And the legislation also states that every member state then has 24 months to implement this legislation into national laws. So in short, about the end of 2024, it is expected for every member state to have implemented NIS2 in the laws, and for organizations to adhere to them. But of course, that doesn't mean that organizations only should start working on it in 2024. But yeah.
Yes, because like I introduced earlier, this is the first episode actually in a series. So now we want to learn more about the background of this NIS2 directive and the impact and so on. In one of the next webinars, we also invited one of the regulators actually to join us. And we hope to plan that in January. And then the regulator can explain a little bit also the experiences they gathered with the NIS1 directive, actually, how it helped and so on. And in the third episode, we would like to invite one of our customers who is already under the NIS1 directive, and they can explain a little bit how they approach this and how they actually approve or demonstrate to the regulator that they have taken applicable measures and that they also notify the right people.
I think Sjoerd is having some.
Thank you very much. So what type of impact will it have on organizations, and how can we comply? Can you tell me a little bit more about the distinguishment, for example, between the important and the essential entities?
Yes, so of course it will not only have an impact on the organizations themselves. So I will tell a little bit more about the important and the essential entities or organizations in a minute. But first I want to also describe that the organizations are not the only ones that have to start working. The governments, the local governments, the national governments, they have to start setting up stuff as well, such as the information sharing capabilities, as Bart already explained. Vulnerability disclosure. They want a European-led vulnerability disclosure system. So we already have the CVEs, which are I think they are officially American, but they are used all over the world. We want to keep this information. We also want a European version of this, so we are not dependent on a non-European entity or body that is able to tells us that there are vulnerabilities or they're not, or classifying vulnerabilities or not. So what you, for example, see is that China has a vulnerability database as well, and there is a difference in numbers that are in the CVE database and in the China version of the CVE database. So yeah, as you can see, there might be some vulnerabilities that you do not want to disclose with the whole world, but maybe only with Europe. Moreover, governments have to give you support as well in this implementation of NIS2, especially if you're one of the smaller companies. There will be some support for you as well. And then the second question about the distinguishment of important and essential services. Important or essential entities. What you see is the essential entities are sort of a level higher than the important entities. And these essential entities, they have to prove beforehand, like what I already explained, that they have to adhere to some cybersecurity requirements. For example, they have to do proactive risk assessments. You can get audited to see if you have these risk assessments done, to see if your cybersecurity is on point before you are actually being attacked. And the most important difference with important organizations is that the important organizations only have to do this after the fact. So let's say there was an incident. There will be, in the Netherlands, this is true already, but it will be European-wide. There will be a, how do you call it? reporting obligation. So you're attacked, you have to report this to the government. This will be European-wide. So if you're an important entity and you are attacked, you have experienced a cyber incident, then an auditor will check: was your cybersecurity posture, was it adequate? Could it be prevented? Could it reasonably be prevented? And if not, there are of course consequences, as Bart described already.
Yes, right. Let me see if there are already some questions coming in there. Right. Okay, can you tell me a little bit more about how companies actually demonstrate compliance to their regulators? We'll talk more about it in the next session with the regulator at table, but can you introduce it already a little bit?
Well, that's quite an easy to answer your question. The NIS2 directive only indicates that something has to be done. The how it will be done depends on the national implementations of the NIS2 directive. And Bart can give you the more details about this. If you could re-ask the question, Sjoerd, I will hand it over to Bart again.
So Bart, I hope your speech was successful actually, and will lead to some impact. The main question we were discussing right now is how can companies actually prove to their regulators that they comply to the NIS2 directive?
A very good question. So what we said in the NIS was a telco, right? A telecom corporation, their IT architecture might develop in every 2-3 days, right? And you need to make sure that the legacy systems there are protected. But it might very well be that 30, 40, maybe 60, 70% of the servers in a telco is not patched. But it's not a problem because there's so much legacy behind. It's not internet facing. It's somewhere which is completely controllable. It's not. If you have a risk-based approach, a regulator can see and have a conversation with you and say, look, if you look at a manufacturer, large manufacturers, they have a very stable IT and OT environment, maybe for the next 3 or 4 years. So you need sectoral oversight, sectoral certification, sectoral, let's say, really tailor-made solutions for any company being eligible, being in scope. So that's the answer. And how do you know whether you're in scope? That's up to the member states. But what I try to do is harmonize it as much as possible throughout Europe. So what we try to say is we need European certificates, and NISA will put forward such scheme, 5 to 8 each year. So 5 to 8 cloud schemes will be produced in Greece, Athens, every year. So you might expect that if they're not there yet, we might take international schemes. But it has to be a level playing field, because the basis of NIS2, just for your remembrance, for all people listening, it's not some vague article in the treaties, it's the internal market treaty. That's the basis of this cybersecurity legislation. We want a level playing field across Europe. And you know what, Sjoerd? One of the best things, the credit rating agency, Moody's, who we know from the credit crisis and financial crisis, right? The AAA ratings, they rated the NIS2. They completely tore it apart. And you know what their conclusion was? For Europe and doing business in Europe, the NIS2 is credit positive for companies. Why? Because business continuity is what it's all about. If you get hit as a factory, as a hospital, as whatever you have, you will make sure that you are back in operations ASAP, because that's what the NIS asks of you. The NIS doesn't ask of you to become completely resilient. It's not a compliance machine. It's just that we need some more to get our businesses going while we can be disturbed by threat actors. That's it. And I'm very glad that Moody's, an independent oversight body from the US, says this is really positive for companies. It's not just that you're paying more for cybersecurity. It's you're also paying for the security, the data security of your customers. You're paying for society and the essential role that you play in there. You're paying for your customers, but you're paying also for yourselves to be up and running, do whatever what you like to do. So that's a different view on cybersecurity than we have ever had before.
Yes, and basically you need to prove that you have the appropriate measures in place, and you have freedom to select what is appropriate and do your risk assessment and so on. So how does this differ from actually an ISO 27K implementation, where you have an information security management process, you do your risk assessment, you select the right level of controls, based on those controls you measure the effectiveness of those controls, you have your residual risks, and you discuss with your board or other entities if those residual risks are acceptable, and you do the circle again. Is this something that will help for the NIS2 directive then?
Yeah, well, it's very similar, of course. And if we don't have a European certification scheme, ISO will help out, and others, cloud certification scheme might help out. But what is important, what we added in the NIS2 is that we have two sorts of entities, right? Important and essential. So these important entities.
I updated us a little bit about that already.
Yeah, but it's different, right? Because important entities have ex ante. Ex post, and essential entities have ex ante and ex post audits. That's a different. And who will do those audits? We will see. I think it will differ from sector to sector. Sometimes it might be a government agency when it comes to critical infrastructure like telecom operators, but in other instances it might very well be the market saying we have provided a stamp like the ISO. We said we've audited this and it's fine. So there's business opportunities everywhere. I see people in this call. There's business opportunities.
Hey, and in Europe, we are also talking about the Critical Entities Resilience Directive, the CER. How does that link to the NIS2 then?
Good question. So we have the same annex. And what is an annex? That's legislative jargon for who is in scope of a legislative file. So, for example, in the NIS2, we said if you're over a 10 million revenue a year and 250 employees, then you are in scope. And what does that mean? You have to comply with, but it also, you're not in scope actually, you also have to be in the list. So you're not in scope when you bake cookies, right? But you are in scope when you provide essential services. And we define that very narrow, from hospitals to manufacturers to water and electricity, etc. And it's very well defined in that annex. That annex is one-on-one copied in the Critical Entities Directive, one-on-one. So it's not just about, it's not just about cybersecurity. That annex equally says it's just as important that you're guarded against great natural disasters or what you have. And that is into place right now. One of the things I'm very proud of that I've put in there, the subsea infrastructure that has been put in our seas in the last couple of decades. It wasn't in the legislation yet, but we've put it in. Why? Because the internet is of so much importance, but also high voltage cables and pipelines like Nord Stream, of course. But I was focusing on optic fiber cables, which is very important that we see that as a vital infrastructure as well.
Yes, and earlier when you was gone, Stas introduced that it's basically the CEO of a company that can be held accountable in those kind of situations. And there's actually a question coming in on this. I'm going to read it out loud. Is it not a bit undemocratic and too much Russian style to make CEO or CIO personally liable for security hacks that are never prevented at all? Should it not be a bit more balance? You are scaring CEOs and CIOs even to start and run a company. So how do you react to that?
Well, if you're starting a company, you won't be eligible because you're not in scope. But listen, this was an idea from Thierry Breton, the commissioner, the French commissioner for the internal market. And what did he say? He was the CEO of Atos, one of the largest software firms in Europe. He said, if I wasn't liable for any cybersecurity, I wouldn't invest in it. And he said, we are now. The second thing I'd like to say is, in 2010, here in the Netherlands, DigiNota was hacked, a certificate authority, misused by Iranian intelligence services. And in the House of Parliament, the minister at that time, Minister Donner, said it should be a CEO matter, boardroom issue. Over 12 years, we've tried everything in our realm to get it into the boardrooms of our companies, and we didn't succeed. And now we're succeeding because we make it personally liable. Is it too far? I think no. Why? Because this is what will be happening. I predict you this. No CEO will have that liability, would like to have that liability. So it will be covered by insurances. That's my answer. And what will insurances do? You know, insurances will come in and they will say, you pay, I don't know, 30K a year for the cyber insurance, but we can bring that down to 3K a year, because we will bring in a company like Secura, like others in the market, would say, okay, we segment what you have, we monitor what you have, we make sure that you have the best security and endpoint solutions available. And therefore, our risk appetite has become much, much better. And then the cybersecurity guys say, we have a plus on this. This is a good infrastructure to protect. And then the security companies say, we'll go for 30,000 a year, we'll go for 3,000 a year, we will insure it. That's what has happened in the US. That's what's going to happen in the EU. And my prediction will be that only it's written very well in legislation. I think it's only demonstrably negligence towards your cybersecurity infrastructure will lead to a fine, right? It's not like if you're being hacked, you will be fine. No, it's not that. It's a real negligence, demonstrably, time after time. Then we have the possibility for a fine. It's not Russian style. It's very modest, but we have to make sure that something happens after 12 years of debate. Nothing happened. Now we will.
Yes. Another question that came in is the UK NCSC has a certification scheme already called Cybersecurity Essentials and Cybersecurity Essentials Plus. Are there any plans to launch similar schemes in the Netherlands or Europe-wide?
I've intensively studied them and tried to get that in the NIS2 in different language. So you will recognize much of that. Because the UK, let's be honest, they've been thought leader in this realm for the past, 5 to 10 years. And I don't know how it will be in the next couple of years, but at least they were. So I try to learn from any country. So yes, we will try to incorporate that as much as we can. For companies outside of scope, right? What the UK does very well is saying, so you're not an essential or important business, but what you will get is support from the government to have your email server checked, right? Does it has DKIM, DMARC? Do you have anti-spoofing measures there? But also your website, right? Does it have the proper protection? Those are free services from the government towards companies and businesses. That's what I'd like to see here. That's what we put forward in the NIS2 as well. We ask from governments across Europe to help and support businesses in cybersecurity, which many of the governments are not doing yet.
Right. So actually there are not only requirements pushed to companies, but there are also benefits that you want to introduce with this NIS2, benefits towards those companies in scope.
Huge. This is one of the most important things. If we ask stuff from businesses, we have to support them as well. And how do we support them? One, like sharing arrangements will be much, much better. First, because of the GDPR, but second, also because we said we expect listen, if you have an incident, for example, you have to report it within 24 hours. I was against it. I thought 72 hours was even fast because I never managed to do that when I was in office. But 24 hours, we said, is not a report. 24 hours calling the government is a help request. Help me. Something has happened. I don't know what. You don't have to report anything more than saying, help me. And that is in the legislative file, in the recitals I put in, that is the goal for any governmental organization to start helping businesses to get rid of malware in their systems. There's a very different approach than we've seen until now, right? So businesses will benefit from this. This is also why Moody's said this is good, because the governments will have a new posture, active, helping, not being passive, not saying we can't share, is what you can, you must share, you must help. And another thing that we said is you can scam. Right? Governments can start scanning the infrastructure of vital and important entities, but also outside to help companies mitigate certain known threats. Another thing that's been put forward is we can share with our across borders with our Japanese and our Canadian friends, for example. But even more important, what I've put in is we can have real-time monitoring. If you want that, if you have a huge problem, you're being hacked, you can put a government probe inside your company's premises, and government can help with the IOCs and with anything they have. They can help you mitigate a threat or monitor a threat. The legal basis is there.
Thanks. So there's a lot of benefits that compensate maybe the strengthened requirements. Another question from the audience is the NIS1 was adopted in the UK actually because they were part of the EU, but now post-Brexit, can we expect them to adopt the NIS2 as well?
Not sure how the UK will do this. What we did see is out of nothing, out of the blue, this summer, India suddenly put forward new legislation, which is almost a copy of the NIS2. They do it a bit differently, but out of nothing, they really studied it. The second I'd like to say is if you look at the emergency legislation that Joe Biden has put forward, it resembles a couple of the compromise that we found here in Brussels. It resembles a couple of that. So it's like a legislative, yeah. They're following it. I don't know what the UK will do.
Right. We'll see. Hey, and regards to certification, you were telling that basically certification could help in proving that you have the appropriate measures in place. Is this something that a company can do internally, or do they need help from external suppliers on that, or how will that work in your opinion?
Well, many is up to the member states and how the NIS2 will be put forward into national legislative schemes, right? It's not like it's a directive. So member states still have some freedom on how to do that. What I want is a harmonized approach across Europe. So if you have a European scheme, it's preferential for me, right? Because I think if you have a European cloud scheme, for example, then all cloud providers, you know what to do in the entirety of Europe, and there's a level playing field also for competition, and that goes for every business. What I dislike at this point in time is that the cloud scheme that NIS has put forward is very political of nature. For example, they've said we don't want American operators or non-EU operators operating our cloud when it comes to sensitive data categories. I dislike it because it's very political. It's a trade war that we're invoking, and it's not mere technical the delivery from NIS. So this is very weird for me. What I've tried to do in the NIS2, because that certification scheme was based on the Cybersecurity Act from 2017, in 22 is, listen, we want stakeholder involvement, we want to make impact assessments, then we want the parliament to have a say in it as well. It should be merely technical, not political. It should be as broadly discussed as possible. So we have support for how we govern ourselves in Europe. And that's my preference, but the way things are going now are not the way I'd like it to go. But in the NIS2, I think that we have new, we will make sure that they will abide with a broad stakeholder management support, and everyone will get their say, including the industry. And then how to uphold it, I'd like to see that harmonized across Europe. But if we don't have a European scheme, then let's take an international other scheme, but harmonize that throughout Europe. But because the legal basis for this piece of legislation is the internal market.
Right. Understood. One topic we also covered while you were away is a little bit about the supply chain requirements, actually.
Yeah.
And there was a question coming in, actually, how are companies intended to implement this, actually, from a practical perspective? And how should the audit be performed? Is it up to the companies to audit their supply chain, or is it the supply chain to prove their compliance themselves? Can you elaborate on it?
Well, a couple of things. First is you have a tier 1 responsibility. So you look at your suppliers. If they make a mess out of it, you say in your SLA, your self-levelers agreement, you say, come on, guys, do something about cybersecurity, at least on the file that we're working on with you. Otherwise, we have a problem. And that's very reasonable, I think. And I think it will incentivize many companies like ASML in the Netherlands already is doing, saying our suppliers, tier 2 or tier 3 even, will be cyber secure. We will help them because it will influence our entire project process here in Veldhoven. And I think many companies have that dependency inside. So it's not like it's an extra task. That's first thing. Second thing is supply chain is also a problem of risky vendors. And what we've put forward is that the heads of the national cybersecurity centers, the CSIRTs, can come together and say we want an investigation towards a certain piece of software or hardware, and we want to investigate that, make a report, and if we say this is too risky for this and that part of our vital infrastructure, we can say we want it out. That's good. The third thing I'd like to say is this NIS2 is about entities. It's not about supply chain risks in risky vendors like hard and software. The problem is we have a separate piece of legislation coming up right now in the next couple of months. It's called the Cyber Resilience Act. That's not about entities, but it's about products. that will make sure that hard and software products will be better coded, will be better safeguarded, etc. And also liability issues. Yeah, and I think it's necessary. The fourth thing I'd like to say is if you have a supply chain issue with one of your suppliers, then make sure that you put it in a service level agreement, and make sure that you do it. If you don't, and there's a demonstrable negligence there, then yeah, sure, you're being held liable for that. And if you think that is unreasonable, think again, right? Many of the issues that if I look at my previous experience, for example, the many let's say, for example, public tenders that have been hacked by the Chinese, they don't go for the companies that actually compete in the tender. They go for the financial and the legal services behind it. It's small companies that are the weakest links. The supply chain, it's the weakest links for your own safety and security. And you have to make sure that you fill in arrangements on cybersecurity, because we're losing the battle as Europe. The industrial battle, the intellectual property theft battle, we're losing it. So we want more from companies there. Yeah, that's true. But I think that companies should do more, even though we don't ask them.
I see a very interesting question also for the next session, actually, where we have a regulator at the table. So maybe you can have half a minute on it, because we would like to wrap up on this question and see how the regulator will answer the same question in the next episode. It's about how you envision governments to comply and competently execute the services proposed. Are there indicators that they are ahead of private companies on competence, and are they really the right people to oversee all these kind of things?
Very good question. I don't think that the government should compete with the market, right? I fully agree. What the market can do,
the competence, they should have the right level then.
Yeah, but if you look at, there's already some oversight bodies which are very competent for telcos, for example, nuclear facilities, and they can do a lot, right? And it's not rocket science. And many of the things that we're asking for companies, especially when it's an important entity, is not that much. And if you're in a certain sector, it's just about two-factor authentication, monitoring, segmenting, and data management and password management. It's not that much. It's basic hygiene, and we shouldn't treat this as a huge file which is coming towards the companies. It's just a modest investment that you have to make sure that you are in control. Doesn't mean you're 100% safe. It's being in control. Do governments need to look at that? I think for some vital infrastructure, yeah, but as a company, I think some companies will hire other companies and businesses to see whether they comply, and I think it's very good. How do you get the people? How do you get more people into the IT sector? Is the competence there? I fully see what you mean, but listen, we are going in for some long and interesting digital decades, and many of the people out there studying communication sciences or what you have, they should be studying something different, and they should be studying something more in the IT and or cybersecurity, what you have. And if yeah, well, that's something that the governments and anyone should see, right? If you're not awake right now, that's where the future is. That's where your future lies. And I think people will see it. The market will draw people towards that.
Hey, as a final question to you, I thought it was a very, very interesting interview. But there's one thing on top of my mind, is that it must have been a very interesting journey for you to negotiate on this directive, actually. And for sure, you win some, you lose some. And if there was one thing that you could have changed that didn't make it, and if there's one topic that you really think is important but didn't make it, what would that topic be?
That's a good question. Listen, the thing I strive for most is to have, if we ask so much from our businesses, we at least want the government and all governmental institutions to do the same. And I want personally liability on top of that as well, right? And I didn't manage. But what we did manage is to get governmental bodies in scope. Extremely important. So ministries, essential services provided by the government are also in scope. They have to comply with the same rules as businesses do. But I would have liked to see that far further reaching. If you would have asked me, Sjoerd, a very personal, I think what we're doing wrong here in Europe is we don't integrate this from an unclassified until a top secret level. So this is all very much a rackety patchwork of all sorts of services cooperating together. There's so much red tape, there's so much coordination and policy makers. I would like to see more of a convergence. and there's about 17 countries already converging towards one institution in a country dealing with it, from unclassified until top secret. I would have loved to see that, but that wasn't inside the realm of this one. But we'll work on that in the next couple of years.
Nice. And on that note, I would like to thank you very much for joining this webinar. For all the audiences, first of all, we are going to write a blog about this webinar today as well. I already introduced you that we'll have a next episode probably in January with a regulator on the table. But I also would like to ask you all to fill out the survey actually. So please stay on the line. As soon as we close this webinar, you will get a survey form. It is very helpful for us to understand how you appreciated this webinar, but also to have insight into what topics we need to address in the next webinar. There are quite some questions left in the chat section.
Sure.
I will come back to them. Yes.
Sure, please. If people have questions, feel free to reach out to me in my office. Send me something on LinkedIn, Twitter, or send it to my email address. I will have a look at it and personally answer you. Let's make a reference to this webinar and let's be in touch. So if you have questions, feel free to reach out to any one of your listeners, okay?
Super. And there are some questions left as well in the Q&A box, and we'll make sure those get answered. We couldn't cover everything today. So on that note, thanks again for joining. Please fill out the survey, and I hope to see you soon and in the next episode. Thank you very much.